Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to If Deku Got the Omnitrix Part 5. Last time on the What Ifs, the final exams happened with Izuku and Bakugo winning by using Izuku to distract All Might, and shortly afterward, Class 1A and 1B went to the summer training camp, but on the second day they got attacked by the League of Villains, and by the end of the attack, Bakugo and Shoji were taken by League, and everyone who was injured was taken to the hospital hours afterward, Izuku included. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. So we begin this What If the day after the attack, and when Izuku woke up, he saw that Asmus was sitting right next to him reading a newspaper. And when he noticed that Izuku was awake, he told him about what happened after he passed out. And when he was done, Izuku asked how did Asmus know what happened. And in response, Asmus told him that he has been watching him since he seemed to be attracting villains. So he knew it would be a smart idea to make small devices that would keep him in check. And after some more talking, Asmus leaves. And a couple of hours later, most of Class 1A walks into Izuku's room. And Kirishima tells Izuku that he has a plan to save Bakugo, since they have a way to trace where the villains are. He then asks Izuku if he could help him. But hearing this, everyone else tries to talk him out of it, since they don't want anyone else to get hurt, but they weren't able to change his decision. And before he leaves, he tells Izuku that he will leave tomorrow night. And shortly after that, Kirishima leaves along with the rest of Class 1A. And the moment they leave, Izuku gets his phone, and he calls Asmus, and he tells him about what he's planning to do. And he asks him if he could have a couple more transformations, since he needs to be stronger since this all happened because he was too weak. And hearing this, Asmus began to sink, and eventually he gave in, since he knew that he would go even if he took the Omnitrix away. So he tells him to get to his shack whenever he was able to escape. So when Izuku was done with all of his daily checkups, he put a decoy in his hospital bed, and he transformed into Fast Track, and he ran to Asmus' shack. And when he got there, he turned back to normal. And when he was let in, Asmus began to turn the Omnitrix dial, putting in combinations. And after a couple of turns, a flash of green light came out of the Omnitrix. And shortly after that, another flash of light appeared, then another one. And after the fourth one, Asmus got off of Izuku's arm, and he sat down. And when he told Izuku the aliens that he just gave him. And the aliens Izuku got that he later named was first a dinosaur-looking alien that can increase his size along with his strengths, that he named Humongosaur. The second one was a robotic armadillo-looking alien with jackhammer arms that he named Armadillo. And finally, Izuku's last alien was a green vampire that he named Vampire. Asmus also increased the span of time Izuku can be an alien, so now he can be an alien for about 15 minutes with the wait time still being the same, if he did it normally, which is 5 minutes. And after Izuku got these aliens, he began to practice using them. And when it was around 5 in the morning the next day, Izuku turned back into Fast Track and he ran back to his hospital room to get some more sleep. And the rest of the day was spent with Izuku practicing his new aliens while no one was looking. So now we skip to later that night, and when Izuku got to the meeting place, the people that were waiting there were Momo, Todoroki, and Kirishima. And after a bit of talking, Ida appeared right behind him. And after some talking, he agrees to follow them, since he doesn't want them to go too far. And once they agreed, they began to follow the tracker Momo put on Anomu during the attack at the camp. And after half an hour, the group makes it to what seems like a normal building. But when they look inside from a window, they see that this is actually a Nomu factory. But before they could do anything, they saw Mount Lady grow taller than the building, and she kicked the building, destroying the entire building. So seeing as the pros were already there, they decided to just leave. But before they could actually leave, an explosion hit the area around the building, making it so only the wall the group was hiding behind was intact. And Izuku, wanting to know what was going on, ran a couple of feet away from the side of the wall, and he slammed his hand on Snarrow. And when he did, he got engulfed into a green light. And when it was gone, Izuku was Crash Hopper instead. So making the most of this, Izuku jumped up and he landed on top of the building right next to the destroyed wall. And when he landed, he hit himself and he began to watch what was going on. And what he saw was the League of Villains fighting Bakugo and Shoji. And there seemed to be another person in a black suit wearing a mask. And before All For One could notice Izuku, All Might comes from above and he launches himself at All For One. And when the two collide, they both seem to have equal strengths. Then the two began to fight, but from what Izuku could see, he could tell that All Might was holding back, and Izuku believes that it's because he doesn't want to hurt Bakugo and Shoji in the crossfire. And seeing all of this, Izuku jumped down from the building, and when he landed, he told the group the situation, and after a couple of minutes, they come up with a plan. So Momo then created a jetpack for Kirishima and Ida, and when they put them on, the two plus Izuku grouped up, and they put themselves against a building with Izuku's feet on the side of the wall. And when they were ready, Izuku pushed them as hard as he could, and when he did, Ida began to run, and with Kirishima's hardening, they were able to burst through the wall. And when the hole was made, Todoroki made an ice ramp, and with some momentum they had, they were able to go up, and when they got to the end of the ramp, the two turned on their jetpacks. And once this happened, Izuku let go of the two and he began to fall. And while he was falling, Kirishima shouted for Bakugo to grab his hands. And hearing this, some of the league began to run at Bakugo, but before they were able to get to him, he aimed his hands to the ground and he fired a massive explosion, which made him fly into the air. And when he got to the two, he used his explosion to propel them faster away from the fighting. And seeing this, Magna used his magnetism quirk on Mr. Compress, which made him begin to fly to the group. But before he was able to get to them, Izuku engulfed himself in a green light. And when it was gone, Izuku was Astrodactyl. And when the light was gone, he flew at Mr. Compress, and when he got to him, he grabbed Mr. Compress by his shoulders. And using all of his speed, Izuku flew straight back to the ground. ground, and when he got to the ground, Izuku slammed Mr. Compressed to the ground face first. Then Izuku engulfed himself into another bright light, and when it was gone, Izuku was his new alien, Humongosaur. And Izuku began to fight the remaining League of Villains. And whenever Shigaraki got close, Izuku would slam the ground as hard as he could with his tail, making an earthquake. And eventually, Izuku was able to make it to Shoji. And since the two were together, the League of Villains began to surround them. And seeing this, Izuku began to grow, and he picked up Shoji. And when he was the biggest he could be, he jumped into the air as high as he could. And when he landed, he made a giant dirt cloud, and the ground seemed to shake. And while the League was trying to get their footing, Izuku transformed himself into Fast Track. And when he was Fast Track, he ran as fast as he could with Shoji still in his arms. And with this, the two were able to leave the battleground. And they kept on doing this until they were a couple of blocks away. And when they were far enough, Izuku turned back to normal. And after a couple of minutes, the two groups were able to meet up. And when they did, they got to watch the fight between All Might and All For One on a giant screen. And the rest of the fight between the two remained the same. So now we skip a couple of days. And when Inko was asked about Izuku living in the dorms, she said yes, since in this, he hasn't been as injured as many times as he would have originally. And a week after they were told about the dorms, Class 1A got to the dorms with their bags. But right before they go in, Aizawa told them that they were lucky, since if All Might didn't distract the press with his retirement, then they wouldn't have any choice but to expel everyone except Bakugo and Shoji. So now we skip to a week before the school year began. And when the day began, Aizawa told everyone to get dressed in their hero costumes and to meet him in Gym Gamma. And when they got there, they were told that they will be learning ultimate moves for their provisional license exams. And when Aizawa was done talking, everyone split up, taking an ectoplasm clone with them. And by the end of the couple of days, Izuku didn't really change his costume that much, since Izuku doesn't need his costume to be different. And the ultimate move Izuku came up with was a combo attack that he calls Alteration Bombardment. And to do the move, Izuku transforms rapidly, with him randomly changing aliens, making it so his opponents can't predict his movements. But of course, after he does this, he loses time as an alien right afterward. And if he used all of his remaining time he has to wait longer than rather if he did one transformation. So now we skip to the day of the exams. And when Class 1A gets to where the exams are taking place, they meet the same people as they do in the canon. So they know about Inasa and Miss Joke. And after a bit of time, they change into their hero costumes and they walk into the exam room with everyone else. And when the main examiner believes that everyone is there, the exams begin with him explaining the rules of the first phase. And when he's done explaining, he passes out 3 targets and balls to every student. And when they all place them on themselves, the walls of the room began to unfold, and they find themselves in a large arena. Then after they were completely unfolded, they were given a couple of minutes to split up. And most of Class 1A decided to stick together, but Kirishima, Bakugo, and Kaminari leave in a group, and Todoroki leaves by himself. And after a couple of minutes, the exams begin. And the moment it started, every school in the exam began to attack Class 1A. And seeing this, Izuku slammed his hand on Goop, and when the flash of light was gone, Izuku was Goop. And since he was Goop, he made his target sink into his body, making it even harder for other people to hit him. And with the help of their ultimate moves, Class 1A was able to hold their own against all the other schools. But eventually, Yo realized that if Class 1A was together, they wouldn't be able to get them. So he used his quirk to create a tremor under them. And when the ground broke under them, they got split up. And after a couple of minutes, Izuku was able to get out of the rubble. And when he was out, he turned himself back to normal, since he wanted to keep as much time on the omnitrix as he could. And after that, he began to look around. But after a couple of seconds, he noticed that he couldn't see anyone, and he knew that he should find his classmates, or he would be ambushed by other schools. So he began to walk around to find his class. But while he was inside, someone pushes him to the ground and hits one of his targets. Izuku then jumps back, and he goes to face the person that hit his target. But before he could see them, they disappear. So seeing that the person can disappear at will, Izuku slammed his hand on Snarrow. And after he did, he got engulfed into a green light, and when it was gone, Izuku was feedback instead. Then shortly afterward, Kami appeared behind him, and she scratched him. And in response, Izuku powered up his fingertips, and he goes to electrocute her. But when he pointed his fingers at her, she was gone. So Izuku then put his hands to the ground, and he fired out a beam of electricity at the ground, which creates a small dirt cloud. And the reason he did this because he didn't want to alert the other schools of his location. And for a couple of minutes, the two go back and forth, with Izuku trying to hit her, and her avoiding the attacks by disappearing whenever he goes to electrocute her. But by the end of those couple of minutes, the two get surrounded by other schools, since they were able to see multiple blasts of electricity in this area. And when Izuku goes to look at Kami, she was gone. And seeing Izuku, the examinees began to barrage Izuku's balls. And seeing this, Izuku transformed into Astrodactyl. And when he did, he got engulfed into a green light. And when it was, Izuku was Buzzshock instead. And using his small size and speed, he was able to avoid all the attacks. And after a couple of minutes of avoiding, Ochako appears on a nearby rock, but she slips off the rock she was standing on. But before she hits the ground, Izuku slammed his hand on the omnitrix again, and he tried to go for Astrodactyl. And when the flash of light was gone, Izuku was Astrodactyl. So he then flew to Ochako as fast as he could. Then when he grabs her, he flies away as fast as he could, and after a couple of minutes, the two were able to get away. But because of all his transforming he was doing since the start of the test, the omnitrix ran out of juice, so it's currently on recharge mode. And while he was hiding behind a rock, Izuku was scouting for any enemy examinees. And while he was looking, he realized that Ochako would have floated away, since that's specifically what she's been training on for the past couple of days. And once he's realized this, Ochako was beginning to move a ball towards one of Izuku's remaining targets. But before she was able to hit it, Izuku hit her her hand away. He then said that if she really was Ochako, she would have just floated away, and when he says this, Ochako's face began to melt, and when she stopped, she revealed her true face, revealing it to be Kami. But before anything else could happen, the real Ochako and Sero appear, and when Kami sees them, and after confirming that the two are the real things, the three come up with a plan to get the targets that they need. And once the Omnitrix is charged up, they put their plan into action, so Izuku then transformed into Fast Track, and he began to run around, and eventually he was able to get a bunch of examinees' attention, so they began to follow him. And once they began to follow him, Ochako threw weightless rocks around, making shadows in random areas. And once Izuku was under one of these rocks, Izuku slammed on the Omnitrix and he became a vampire. And when the flash of light was gone, Izuku shot out corrupt auras, which hit many of the examinees, and for the ones that were able to avoid them, Zero shot out a line of tape and he tied them up. And with the power of Izuku's corrupt auras, Izuku held the examinees in place. And with the group of examinees unable to run away, Izuku, Ochako, and Zero were able to get the amount of targets they needed to pass the exam. And when they got the targets they needed, an announcer told them to get to the waiting room. Then after destroying the corrupt auras and untaping the others, they began to walk to the waiting room. And when they got there, Kirishima, Bakugo, and Kaminari just made it to the waiting room as well. So now we skip to when the first phase of the exam ends. And when it does, they were given a couple of minutes to rest. And when the break was over, the main examiner got onto a podium, and he began to congratulate them for making it so far. He then began to show them a big screen in the front of the room. The arena they were just in blew up. And when the explosions were over, the examiner told them that a villain just attacked the city, then fled. But there were many civilians that were caught in the crossfire, and he told them that it was their job to rescue them. And when he was done talking, the room they were just in began to unfold. And when it was completely unfolded, the exam began. And when it started, Class of Night started off in one big group besides Bakugo, Kirishima, and Kaminari. And eventually, the group comes across a little kid with blood coming from their head. And Izuku gets some points taken off, since when he was analyzing the situation, he blurted out that this didn't look good. And after Izuku got yelled at, he put on a smile, and he said that it will all be okay. And when the kid hears this, he allows Izuku to take him to the first aid station. So Izuku then transformed into Fast Track, and he ran to the first aid station, while the rest of the group split off to find more people to rescue. So now we skip to when Izuku was done making sure the kid was secured in the first aid station, and he was just about to run back into the city to look for more victims. But before he could, the speakers turn on, and the main examiner tells him the villain that just attacked the city has come back for round 2. And right after he was done talking, someone burst through the walls of the arena, and when the dust settles, Izuku and everyone else at the first aid station sees Gang Orca and dozens of his henchmen. And seeing them, Izuku began to run to the group, but after a couple of seconds of running, Yo stops him, and he tells him to wait. And when Izuku stopped, Yo ran in front of him, and he used his quirk to create tremors under the group. But as a counterattack, Gang Orca used his quirk to hit Yo point blank with his ultrasonic wave attack, paralyzing him. And seeing this happen, Izuku began to run at the group again, and this time, Inasa and Todoroki ran with him to fight the group of villains. Then the same things happened with Inasa and Todoroki while Izuku tried to fight Gang Orca. But since there was fire everywhere, Izuku couldn't get close to actually fight Gang Orca, and eventually a stray flame almost hits Yo. But before he could hit him, Izuku ran as fast as he could towards Yo, and he was able to grab him by his clothes, and he pulled him out of the way just in time. And while he was doing this, he shouted, "What the hell is wrong with the both of you?" And hearing this, the two decided to work together. So after 30 seconds, the two were able to surround Gang Orca in a spiral of flames. But even though it was weakening him, it wasn't enough to defeat Gang Orca. And since he had a water bottle, he dumped it on himself, hydrating himself, and he was about to counterattack. But before he could, Izuku ran into the vortex, only burning him slightly. And since now Izuku could actually fight Gang Orca, Izuku decided to use his ultimate move, so he punched Gang Orca in the gut using Fast Track. Then when Gang Orca tried to punch him back, Izuku engulfed himself in a green light. And when it was gone, he was Crash Hopper, and he jumped from the ground as hard as he could, and he jumped off Orca's face, launching him into the air. And seeing this, Orca tried to fire an ultrasonic wave attack at Izuku, and in response, before the wave got shot out, Izuku got engulfed into another light, and he turned into Echo Echo. And before Izuku landed, Izuku created enough clones to surround Gang Orca. And when they landed, they all began to scream as loud as they could, creating a dome of sound, to the point where, when Orca shot out his sonic wave, it didn't do anything, and in response, Orca began to beat up the Echo Echoes. And when there was one left, Izuku engulfed himself into another light, and he turned into Armadillo, and he began to put his hands to the ground, and he began to create a tremor, which made Orca lose his balance. And while he was distracted, Izuku punched Orca as hard as he could, with his right jackhammer arm. But right after Izuku landed his punch, on the speakers, the main examiner announced that the final civilian has been saved, so now the exams are finally over. And that's where I'm going to leave the what if. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Something Z.